why we do this. I mean, networking, bringing together people from industry, from academia, from government, different stakeholders. That's really the essence of this conference, of this event. That is what I would say is very unique to the TIDC conference. And now we will go into a first session in the afternoon. And the plan is we're going to tackle the same general theme of composites, advances, and future directions, but from a different perspective. Now we're going to look at what academia, what government through the Army and DOTs can contribute to this. And we have lined up 3 talks, and I happen to be giving the first one, so bear with me. And when we get all ready, I'll get started. We'll check with Aaron. We're all set. Yep, we can move on. So the topic of my presentation is on thermomechanical assessment and accelerated aging of composite rebar for reinforced concrete structures. This work is the conclusion of the master's thesis of Rohan Thapa, who is here with us today and has been co-advised by Dr. Sunil Bhandari and I. And what I would like to do is bring 3 objectives from that thesis that are relevant for the conference and touch with the goals that were discussed in the morning, in the keynote presentations, and in the first session. We're going to talk about FRP rebar. And we heard a number of applications. We heard how this product has been implemented in bridges. And just as a quick review, we have here 2 constituents, fiber and polymer. And we have key advantages. We have listened to them, but it's good to overview or review them again. Corrosion resistance being number 1. That's why we want rebar to prevent corrosion in reinforced concrete, what is essentially in bridge decks. We have a product that provides high strength to weight ratio. Chemical resistance in general can be used in chemical plants, in waterfront, or places where concrete is exposed to salt water. And we have an effort going on as well, assessing the life cycle cost of these products. I'm not going to touch on life cycle cost. What I'm going to do is focus on mechanical properties, physical properties, and how we can predict durability through accelerated testing. Next one. 2 projects that showcase the importance of rebar. These projects were conducted fairly recently. We have heard, in fact, about the Harker's Island Bridge replacement in North Carolina. The second one is overseas in Saudi Arabia. These are significant in terms of the use of the materials, and again, highlight the importance of understanding how to design, how to implement these materials, and answer some of the key questions. Remember, when we have this morning in the keynote talk, the goals of ARPA-I, we heard that one important goal is to extend the lifespan twice, okay? To have products that will last twice as much as conventional products. So how we assess that durability, and that is the key question, and I will try to bring the perspective of what the codes are doing today, how they guide us, and show you how we implemented this in the lab. Next one. So I set up here 3 objectives. The first one, we're going to understand a bit more about the materials by looking at physical and mechanical properties. This is not going to be just an arbitrary presentation. What I'm going to do is follow a standard. Okay? And in a big picture, we heard about codes, guidelines, specifications. We have them for buildings. John talked today, John Bussell, about the ACI Committee 440 and all the work that has been done developing those codes and specifications. We heard about AASHTO guidelines and specifications as well. Well, these entities, when it comes to FRP materials, they provide those guidelines, but when the materials have to be assessed, when we need to establish what are the test methods, basically the rubrics, okay, how we measure that performance, they rely on an organization we have in the country, ASTM, the mission of ASTM is to come up with these standards. So my talk today will be to look at the standard where the codes for FRP rebars point to when we need to assess physical mechanical properties and also to look at durability. Durability is my second topic, and I will have something I would like to share about some ideas we developed with my research team toward the end of the presentation. And this is with regard to the thermomechanical performance. Again, we have glass fibers. The rebars I'm going to be using as an example are produced with a vinyl ester resin. Those are thermoset resins. We selected a bar size, half-inch diameter, number 4. That's a nominal diameter. We work with 2 commercial products. TS1 stands for Thermoset Bar 1, and the commercial name is Mateen Bar, and TS2 is V-Rod, produced by Pultron. I mean, those products that can be, again, procured in the US today. So we're going to go through this exercise with these products, and what is important here is to learn about the process of qualifying materials. Next one. So this is what the standard will specify in terms of requirements for these bars. And I'm going to go more into details into these specifications. We have here 3 groups. We have physical properties, we have mechanical properties, and we have durability. Okay? And I'm going to touch on each of these individually. I'm going to apply this to a number 4 bar. That standard, D8505, it's important to recognize that applies to both glass reinforced and basalt reinforced rebar. So it's fairly broad in terms of the type of fibers that can be used for reinforcement. When I go through the slides, I will talk about the requirements, and I will use my 2 sample commercial bars to see how these requirements are met. And I will discuss briefly the test method, the rationale. What are we trying to measure? Why the ASTM standard such and such has been chosen to measure that property. Next one. So physical properties, what are we trying to do here? Well, first we need to measure the cross-sectional area. This is not trivial. I'm going to go into how we do this. The bar nominal diameter, remember number 4 is half-inch diameter, but what is the actual cross-sectional area? What is the diameter that we are going to use? What is the density of that bar? How does this compare with steel? What is the fiber mass content? I mean, this is the amount of fiber reinforcement by weight. One property we're going to put some emphasis is the glass transition temperature. This is an important property of polymers where the material changes the behavior from what I would call a solid glassy behavior to more of a softened behavior. The material starts losing stiffness. And finally, moisture absorption, which is a key property when we assess durability of these materials. Mechanical properties, we look at 2 tensile properties, modulus and strain. We also look at the capacity in tension of the bar, the tensile force, and then we look at 2 shear properties that are significant that have been identified. One is transverse shear, we're trying to cut the bar. The second is horizontal shear, we're trying to split the bar. Next one. So cross-sectional area. We measure this based on the buoyancy principle. And basically what we do is we measure volume divided by the length. We have the cross-sectional area. Now, when we look at the chart there, the standard for every type of bar, remember we're in the number 4. Number 4 has a nominal cross-sectional area given there. Give us a range where that bar needs to fit. So fabricators will play with that range. And for the products that we are illustrating here, there are 2 data points. You can probably see them. They're about the same place. They are within the range, means they meet this requirement in terms of what is the cross-sectional area for that nominal diameter. Next one. Then we look at density. And Rohan put that picture there. It's quite visible, trying to emphasize the density of steel and about 7.85 grams per centimeter cube and how these materials compare to that. So we measure density based on specific gravity. We are reporting here the values. They're about 2.1 for both thermoset bars that were studied. We also reported always, you will see in the tables, coefficient of variations. They are very small, meaning these products have repeatable properties. And now we can look at the ratio with the steel bar, okay? And we see the advantage in terms of weight. Next one. Now, fiber content, how much reinforcement is actually there? And to do this, we do a burn-off test. We do a test where basically we burn off the polymer, the residue will be the fibers, and then based on that, we can compute the weight of the fibers. These two commercial products have weight fractions in the order of 84 to 85%. And here is the requirement of the standard, more than 70%. So they meet that requirement. So this is an example of how bars can be qualified. Next one. Thermal transition temperature. I'm going to talk a bit more about this. The chart on the right there tries to describe the behavior that I explained before. It's a generic chart. You have on the vertical axis modulus that represents, for example, tensile modulus, on the horizontal temperature, and you can see two curves there. One is for an amorphous polymer, and the other one for a semi-crystalline polymer. Think about an amorphous polymer like a plate of spaghetti, very random oriented molecular chains. Now, think about a semi-crystalline one, like that plate of spaghetti. We have some islands within that plate where the molecules are aligned, like little pockets here and there. That would be semi-crystalline. Now, they behave differently. You can see here, the amorphous has a substantial drop in modulus when we reach TG, the glass transition temperature. That is not that significant in the semi-crystalline. The second temperature that is important once we go from glassy to rubbery and we continue increasing the temperature is the melt temperature. And the melt temperature is where we finally lose all the remaining stiffness. For the semi-crystalline will mean those islands, those pockets where the molecules were aligned, now they become completely randomized, no more crystalline structure there. If we go further, we will degrade the material. Now, these two polymers that we evaluated have a glass transition temperature slightly above 100 degrees C. That is the requirement of the standard, okay? And I'm going to come back at the end of my presentation about this requirement. Next one. The chart that I showed before can be obtained using a test called dynamic mechanical analysis. There is another way to measure the glass transition temperature through differential scanning calorimeter, where what we do is we measure the heat flow and we look at the peaks, exotherm and endotherm. They're shown there for the glass transition. There's a little bump when crystallization temperature happens, the melting temperature, as well as the degradation of that polymer. There are, again, two test methods that are within the standard. Each one gives us a different perspective on how the material changes with temperature. Next one. Now, moisture absorption. This is a key property. The standard says no more than 0.25%, okay? And there are the conditions that are given there in 24 hours. And we have done this, and what we measure is a very, very small percentage of moisture absorption for both systems, meaning the polymers that are used there are behaving as expected. And this is important because any degradation related to exposure can be, for example, salt water, can be water in an alkaline environment, can be freeze-thaw cycles. Anything where water plays a role in degrading properties will depend in the ability of that polymer to absorb moisture. So that's why we need to limit that percentage. Next one. Tensile property. This is the king property. This is the one that controls in terms of structural design. And there are requirements from the standard. It's a very difficult test to do, okay? And why is it a very difficult test to do? Because these bars are incredibly strong in tension in the axial direction. So when you try to fail them in tension, they will try to fail in other ways. Maybe slippage at the grips. It may be, I don't know, again, we exceed the load capacity of the actuator. They're not simple tests to do, okay? We learn a lot in the process, but again, there's quite a lot of knowledge in terms of how to properly grip and test these bars. The examples that you have here, these are what I would call good failures. I mean, the fibers are kind of exploding in the gauge area. That points to a very good response in tension. Next one. This is the kind of information we gather from the test. Load deflection or load position, linear until the material starts behaving nonlinear when some damage happens. we extract the first portion of the curve and we measure there the modulus by looking at the stress strain. Next one. Now we go and compare with the requirements for the standard. They're given there. There's a minimal tensile force. There's a minimum modulus. That's key, that modulus. 60 gigapascal. There's a minimum tensile strain. Both materials pass this very well. And we take a look and see what happens with steel. If we had an idea about how steel works, of course, I mean, the tensile strength of steel is not as high. I mean, about a third of what we would obtain with, this is for a steel grade 60, okay? And this is going beyond yielding, if what we obtain for the composite rebar. The steel, what it has is higher modulus, right? But these rebars are hitting the requirement of the standard. Again, this is the requirement that ACI and AASHTO call in when they are designing for these rebars. And what we're doing here, again, is verifying that, as well as the ultimate strain. Next. Transfer shear, okay, here we are trying to cut the bars, okay? It's a test that requires specialized equipment. We have the fixtures there. You can see a little description and also how the bars look like. Those are really nice cuts. I mean, they're cuts through the section, very clear cut. Both bars are performing as expected. Next one. We look at the values and we compare with the requirement for the standard. The standard requires 152 megapascals, and we're getting more than 200 here with both systems. Again, pass the mark. We look at the failure surfaces. This is very important, clear failures. Again, good failure in shear. Next. Now we look at horizontal shear, how the bar splits. That is what we call a short span bending test. It's a or 3-point bending test, and we're trying to create a crack in the neutral axis starting from the edges. And we look at the bars, the fixture that we are applying. Again, it's a specialized fixture. Next one. The standard has a requirement of about 38 megapascals. It comes with decimals because it was converted from PSI. Both bars perform very well, almost double the requirement from the standard. Okay, so they will prevent that splitting. Next one. So here I have a summary of kind of the grades that we're getting. Both systems make all the checks, okay? And I put a comment on the void content we measured in one of the bars. We couldn't measure that in the other one, but again, that void content was within what we would expect in typical bars. Again, this is what qualifies a bar. Next. Now we look at accelerated aging. This is ongoing. So what I have here is the snapshot of what we have up to today. This is, again, a study that will take longer time. We have data for 30 and 60 days of exposure. We did distilled water. We did at different temperatures. Why at different temperatures? When we increase the temperature, we accelerate the moisture pickup. And by having different temperatures, we can use predictive models like time temperature superposition, because we also have different times. We also look at alkaline resistance. This is a requirement from the guidelines because in fresh concrete, the bars will be exposed to an alkaline environment. Of course, when the concrete cures, that will not be the case, but there is a time of exposure and the codes call for this. We do this also at different temperatures. Next. So it takes quite a lot of planning in the lab in terms of having the right chambers, water circulating chambers that are set up at the right temperatures, and maintaining, in the case of the alkaline exposure, the correct pH. Again, a lot of work goes in terms of doing these durability studies, and they run over time, okay, as well. So again, I want to give you an idea of all the investment that this takes. Next. So in the experimental program, you have here a little bit of our setup. We have that rack with 6 chambers going on at the same time. In one set, we're doing alkaline. In the other one, we're doing distilled water. Next. We look at the moisture pickup over time. These are the 2 polymers, TS1 in green, TS2 in blue. There is a pickup that happens as a function of temperature. This is for 24 hours, but that moisture pickup is well below what the standard requires, meaning they're behaving as expected. They're meeting that requirement. We should have no concerns about moisture expansion or moisture absorption leading to any degradation. Next. Something important for us is to look at retained properties. And what we do is we look at the different properties that we assess. Here we're looking at tensile properties and what percentage of the property we retain after the material was exposed. And green color means we are passing the standard. I don't see any red here. I mean, the retentions are fairly high in all the cases. Next. Now, we're looking at kind of the same behavior, but we're trying to cut the bar. Transverse shear, again, the failure modes here are different. Of course, we have that fixture there. The same idea, the same time of exposure, same times, same temperatures, and again, looking at the retention of properties, and again, meeting what the standard requires. Next. In the case of the horizontal shear, we do remember this 3-point bending test, and we repeat our experiments. I know it's a lot of data. The intent here is to show you that it's a major effort, okay? It's very well organized in terms of what the standard requires, but the implementation is not trivial, okay? And again, we go through this process. This allows us, once we complete this study, once we have the time, the long-term exposure, the 90 days, now we can do time temperature superposition. So there's a little bit of a trove of data here that can allow us to do long-term predictions. So we're building that data set. Next. We have some conclusions. Negligible moisture absorption, alkaline resistant retain 93% of the strength across all tests and temperatures. And of course, the recommendation is we need to continue for the longer time exposure. Next. I would like to briefly mention what happens when we elevate the temperature of these polymers. And the intent here is, think about this. I mean, we want to be creative. We want to innovate. Okay? We don't want to be limited to just one polymer system. So what we would like to do is not to be limited to a property of one polymer like the TG of 100 degrees C. That is what we have right now in the standard. We'd like to look at performance. I mean, how the materials behave at higher temperatures and put the requirements in terms of performance. Then whatever material meets that performance, that material will be good, okay? So it would be not be tied to a prescription on a particular resin, but it will relate to how the material behaves. I'm going to give you a very quick overview. Yep. So what we do is we run tests with an environmental chamber inside the testing frame. We look at a test that discriminates very well the performance at high temperature, and that is the horizontal shear by 3-point bending, because it looks at the interface between fibers and polymers. Next. And what we have done here is we look at how the apparent shear changes with temperature. It goes down as expected, okay? That is what happens. Remember, these polymers had a TG of 100 degrees C. So here is where we have that kind of cliff. I mean, where properties will go substantially down, okay? What we're trying to do here is to look at what properties we retain at different temperatures and try to come up with performance requirement. So for example, we can define a critical temperature where we retain 50% of the strength, okay? And that is independent of the polymer system. That's what we like to see in the standard. So what we're doing here is, so far what I did is I follow the standard. Now what I'm saying is I'm trying to be a bit critical of the standard and saying, how can we do better? And do better for me means how we can use the standard to innovate and not be restricted. Next one. This is more information and basically shows that the load position response changes substantially for both polymers as we increase the temperature, as expected. I mean, again, both polymers meet the standard. What we're trying to do is have this further understanding on the temperature effect. Next. So our recommendation, and I am a member of ACI 440, subcommittee on durability, and kind of my special interest there is to bring these ideas to the subcommittee. I mean, see if we can come up with a broader vision on how to assess these materials for higher temperature. Next one. So we talk about physical and mechanical properties. We talk about accelerated aging, and we talk about elevated temperature, okay? Those were the three topics I wanted to touch today with you. For number one and number two, I follow the standard. Number three, I try to get one step ahead and see if we can do a contribution here. Thank you very much. I can take questions. You have one.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Water absorption. So we've done a lot of work in the Navy on that.
Yep.
And what we usually look for is the saturation curve.
Yes.
So it's usually like for thick laminates, 6 to 9 months.
Right.
So you're kind of thinking that way?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, remember, this is ongoing, the accelerated aging. Today, I'm presenting what we have up to today. I mean, I met with Rohan, the graduate student, last week, and this is where we are today. The tests are going on. Yeah, and we will go to saturation, of course.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm curious just because in marine structures, there were some studies back, and what we found pretty hard correlation as the fiber content goes up, the water absorption goes up.
Of course.
And fatigue life goes down.
Yeah.
And we don't operate anywhere near 85%.
Okay.
For in the marine world, like we like to be 60. That's a lot of resin.
Yep.
Protects fibers.
Yep.
Obviously, you know, guys running 70.
Yep.
And how you 85 still. That's a kind of.
Well, the standard has a minimum of 70%, and this 85 is what allows the products to meet the requirements for modulus, basically. That's 60 gigapascal.
Yeah, like having a lower spec is great. Don't you think we need an upper one? You would agree 100% fiber content would be a really bad rebar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah.
Is it 95? It ain't gonna work.
No, that's a great point. I mean, the standard has only one limit. Your point is it needs an upper limit too.
Absolutely needs an upper.
Okay, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a good point. Well taken.
And just one last thing, because it struck me. You had 60 GPA.
Yeah.
Modulus, and the steel is 200.
Yeah.
And are they the same diameter in application, or is it making the glass one 4 times bigger to make up for the actual load bearing?
Okay, so these are the examples I presented are number 4 bars, nominal diameter half inch, and the ACI guide specifies how to design for these bars. Now, that 60 gigapascal, I'm going to say this in very, very generic terms, okay? Imagine if you have a crack that is forming concrete. Imagine a bar crossing that crack, okay? The idea is that bar needs to prevent that crack from opening in a way that is uncontrolled and the whole section cracking. So you need a minimum amount of stiffness, a minimum amount to control that crack opening. That is the 60 gigapascal. That will do the job, okay? Now, when you design for strength, following the ACI code, you use basically the tensile strength of the bar.
So if that's true, then I'd be able to use a steel bar quarter of the diameter and have the same effect?
No, because the steel, well, for that crack opening, but you will not get the strength with the steel bar. You will not get the tensile strength. The bar will fail in tension.
Yeah.
There are 2 different aspects. Crack opening is basically related to serviceability. I mean, you need to prevent that crack opening. Tensile strength is related to failure.
Right. So not being a civil engineer.
2 limit states that you need to check.
So basically what you're saying is the rebar really doesn't contribute to the strength of the concrete structure that much. Is that the right way?
No, it contributes in tension. So the way reinforced concrete works is like a marriage of concrete and the reinforcement. Concrete does the work in compression, the reinforcement in tension. The lever arm is what creates the bending capacity. And that is the limit state for the flexural capacity of the bar. But in addition, you need to meet serviceability requirements. One of the serviceability requirements relates to the cracking of concrete. That has to be controlled. So there are different checks. Yeah.
Yeah.